How quickly can I beat a randomized game of Pokemon Yellow? Well, it depends on the starter, and I got some good ones. As we get started, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more of these custom Pokemon challenges, and I wish you luck in your own playthroughs. I get Haunter in my very first attempt. This is so insanely lucky. I was planning on getting some practice with a couple attempts to get more familiar with the strategies of a randomized Gen 1 playthrough, but once I saw my starter, I just went for it. I have a different overlay today, provided by Speedrunner0218. There are some specific rules to these randomized runs. Once I start a run, I cannot restart with that save and I have to randomize again. No items are allowed in battle and no other Pokemon can be used besides the starter you get randomized to you. I do still need to plan for some HM users for later in the game as well. Since this game has all trainers and all encounters randomized, there are some cool encounters. I do get reset on the Doduo at the required trainer in the forest, but that's the only reset we get as we make it to Brock. Haunter's very weak to physical moves, so Peck and attacks like that can actually do decent damage. Obviously normal moves don't work, but since it's randomized, we're going to see a pretty good variety of typings, including at Brock, where he has a Beedrill, which is a really weird thing for Brock to have. The next up is Ponyta, and I'm using Confuse Ray to make it even easier for Haunter. Nightshade and Confuse Ray are a great set for early in the game. As we get out onto Route 3, we're going to run into a couple of really big hurdles all of a sudden. I wasn't expecting it, but there are a couple of Dugtrios on this route, and this early in the game with Dig, man, that is just a huge weakness for Haunter. Being Poison type in Gen 1 gave two huge weaknesses to Haunter: Ground type moves and Psychic moves, which are already pretty strong. You have Dig, which is 100 base power in Gen 1, as well as Psychic and Confusion, which are still pretty good. It does so well, it's an incredible Pokemon, especially once you get Gengar. Its stats are amazing. Outside of the weaknesses I mentioned, it's an incredible Pokemon. Once we get to Misty, she actually does have a Goldeen, which is kind of a fun return to water types, but then she has Gengar. Confuse Ray can mess me up, it's a tough matchup. I get another reset here, but good news is that's my last reset on this entire run with Haunter. So a little bit of a rough start, but then we really get the ball rolling. We fight the rival, and he has a Seeking to start, which is actually easier than what you usually have to deal with. You have to deal with Growl and Leer and Sand Attack, but he has that later in his team this time, and then an Omanyte is his ace, which isn't terrible, but really can't do a ton against Haunter, so pretty easy. Surge, however, has a Jolteon, and that's a pretty big upgrade, so that's pretty cool. And then we get Thunderbolt, and Thunderbolt's going to be an amazing thing for Haunter, because it actually can learn this move, and with the high special, it's going to be super useful as we get into the game. Normally, the self-destructing hiker will have a Graveler and a couple of Geodudes that all have self-destruct, which wouldn't actually be a problem against Haunter, but with Thunderbolt and Nightshade, it's pretty quick work. So you see I kept the status moves on my moveset as long as possible. Nightshade is decent reliable damage. Since it's a set damage move, it can hit anything. And Thunderbolt is really great type damage. Once I get through to Celadon, I can actually open up Saffron, and I was about to head to the rival fight, and then I realized there's another upgrade for Haunter that'll be a huge help, and that is Psychic. Psychic is going to be a huge benefit. I go fight Erica, and she has some pretty weak matchups against Gengar, and Gengar is already leveling up so quickly. Another benefit of these randomized runs that I noticed is that you get even more experience than you normally would because you're fighting Pokemon at the same level as they would be, but as the evolved versions and things that give good experience. So it really helps with the base level and the speed of which you can move through the game without training. The type matchup is really on display at the Sylph rival, sometimes called Rival Fivel. He has things like a Golbat, or Golem that has a low special, a Weezing that's weak to Psychic, and the Amistar now, which is weak to Thunderbolt. So Gengar just makes such quick work of these teams at this point. It just makes fast work of all the late game gym leaders. Even with these high levels, it now has such great coverage, but also the stats and the speed it needs to move first and hit hard, and that really helps a ton. We get to Blaine, and by this point I've noticed an interesting trend. When you're fighting a team, if they have fewer members of their team, they have less chances to roll a good Pokemon. So the smaller a team in a randomized run of Pokemon Yellow, they actually get easier, which is interesting. Even if they're high level, that doesn't matter so much as long as they get a bad roll. And the Porygons are kind of interesting. So both Blaine and Giovanni will have a Porygon, which is a fun matchup you don't typically see. I think the only Porygons you can get are at the Game Corner in Gen 1. I don't think there's a single trainer that has one. Put it in the comments if you know of one. I can't think of one off the top of my head. By the time we get to the next rival fight, it's just another show of Gengar's strength. Obviously, Gengar is one of the best speedrunning Pokemon in Gen 1. It is insane, and if I had had some practice, I feel like this one could have really been good. Since this is my first real speedrun of a randomized Pokemon Yellow, it definitely has been kind of a learning experience, and I feel like if I had kept practicing this Gengar run, it could have been insane later on. It's interesting because sometimes a trainer would be a big problem, like say Sabrina for Gengar could be an issue with psychic types, but in randomized runs, you really have no way to know where the struggles are going to be. Obviously early game with the Doug Trios was pretty rough, but once we're in the league, it's actually going really well. We're a high enough level, we have the great moves, and we can't really be hit by much of anything besides the ground and psychic types. So we're just watching out in case something comes up, but we're seeing a ton of fighting types and poison types and water types that are just falling to single hits a lot of the time, which is awesome. Even at level 51 here, as we leave Lorelei, is an incredible spot to be in for the league. We get to see Bruno again today, which is actually pretty rare. We don't always get to see Bruno's team because he's often just bad and not interesting, but I wanted to show as many of these randomized teams as I could, so I wanted to give him his little spotlight there. Agatha is another one that normally would be an issue because of all the status moves and the way that her team is designed, but in a randomized run, her general strategy just doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of been phased out. And at Lance, we have Rhydon leading the pack here, and that's a pretty bad start. Rhydon is pretty terrible, especially into a Gengar. If it doesn't know Earthquake, it's kind of helpless. Executor is a good example of a Pokemon that should be strong against Gengar, but because Gen 1 logic, Executor just doesn't get anything good as its level 1 learn set. It just kind of is set up for failure. Some TM moves or something like that would really make it interesting, but with level up moves only, since it's a stone evolution, it just doesn't get anything. So now it can't hit Gengar with anything except Hypnosis, which is just annoying. And this is the one Pokemon that I don't have an answer for. Thunderbolt and Psychic are both not very effective and don't do that much damage since it has good special. So it's just kind of a slow slog. I did at this point know Mimic. Maybe I could have mimicked either Barrage or Stomp. Maybe that would have helped. I grabbed Mimic while I was in Saffron just to see if I would even need it. I don't think it really helped that much, but maybe there it could have. But once we get to the Champions team, we are able to defeat Blue and finish Pokemon Yellow in a randomized playthrough in just 53 minutes and 7 seconds. An incredible playthrough, and that was just my first playthrough. But now let's get on to my best run and the run I'm most proud of. Thank you again to Speedrunner0218 for the overlay and for providing the setup for this randomizer. This was a really fun challenge and my first time doing it, so I really had a blast. My second playthrough I started with a Charizard, which could be good or bad. Charizard is not the greatest of the Gen 1 starters for an actual speed run. It can be good. It very much depends on the matchups because Charizard has some weaknesses that can be exploited as we get through the playthrough. Obviously, electric moves are going to be pretty rough. Ice moves are actually pretty rough because in Gen 1, fire does not resist ice. Rock moves are really bad if we do find some. They're kind of rare in Gen 1. Right off the bat, we get a pretty nice start. We get a Max Elixir in the forest, which is a huge help. These Max Elixirs are actually going to be really essential for the league. It's going to help us get through without running out of PP. Just like with Gengar, we get a reset on the trainer in the forest. This is just really unlucky. We got another bad matchup with Jolteon, but we try it again. We get some more luck. We just can't get hit with electric moves. That's just not good. Once we make it to Brock, though, we have some easy matchups, and that really helps speed us up. At this point, Charizard's kind of on a roll. It's got Ember and Scratch only, which is a little bit, tough to start. Just not huge damage, but great stats. Okay typing. As we get into Mount Moon, I get to pick up an important TM, which is Mega Punch. This early, Mega Punch is pretty helpful. It's way better than Scratch. Its accuracy isn't perfect, but it's better than Scratch, and it's going to be okay for now. I get a little bit more training in. We get to fight this super nerd who has a Flareon and a Bellsprout and an Electabuzz, which is a really odd team, but I kind of like it. I like seeing the Electabuzz and the Magmar, by the way. I really wish that these had been used more in some of the teams in Gen 1 because they are really unique, and I really like the designs of these Pokemon. We beat up Team Rocket, and we get to their ace, which is actually a Rhydon. Once we beat Team Rocket, though, we can get off to Cerulean City, and we can start prepping for Misty. Now, Misty would normally be a big problem because the matchup, once again, fire to water, obviously not a great one. But for a randomizer, it really just depends on the luck. And today we do get pretty lucky. Haunter is a little tough. Haunter with the set damage and the confusion can be a problem. The big problem is they get paralyzed. Paralysis is one of the most devastating statuses I think in Gen 1. It is just really rough. And then going into Golduck, it sets me up just to have a real struggle time here. Luckily, Golduck has a really bad early learn set and doesn't have any water moves, which is good. But it just takes forever with Disable and Scratch and just getting paralyzed and trying to just muscle my way through that fight. Rival number 2 here has some interesting matchups. Honestly, should be kind of tough, but since I'm fully evolved at this point already, and I have Mega Punch, I can kind of get around some of my weaknesses, like Dratini and Krabby that I should be weak against with my fire moves. It is kind of funny to see 2 Fearos on the Rivals team. We get super lucky when we go to get our Charmander, which has been randomized as well, and we get a Nidoking, which is an excellent HM user. That's going to be a huge benefit, and we don't have to go and catch a surfing Pokemon anymore or something for strength. We finish up the trainers above Cerulean City, and we get to see an Alakazam, which is pretty fun. I like seeing all these Pokemon that you don't get enough of in the original game. We get to go to Bill's house, and then we can head on to Vermilion City. At this point, I can kind of talk through my strategy. I did find the TM for Body Slam, which is helpful for now, but I don't think it's going to be on my final moveset. I am going to teach Charizard Dig and Fly, which maybe aren't the best moves sometimes for Charizard, but because of the type of challenge we're facing today, it actually can be really helpful to avoid having to catch more Pokemon. I do want to keep a spot for a Flamethrower on this moveset because I really want that move. It's just so good. It's definitely Charizard's best move as far as its regular learn set. I will also be replacing Scratch with Slash, which is going to be a great upgrade as well once we get to that point. As well as having a decent moveset now, Charizard is really over-leveled. It does really well here, and we're already level 32 getting ready for Surge. We then pick up a Sand Slash just to have another cut user. That's just, I found that in the grass, and it was an easy catch. And we head to Surge, and he actually has a Starmie, which could have been an issue, but now with Body Slam, Charizard has a great damage against water types, so it really isn't that bad. We're able to dig back to Cerulean, and we're able to pick up the bike using the bike voucher. Then we make our way to Rock Tunnel, where we fight a couple of required trainers, including the self-destructing Hiker, who today isn't really an issue at all. And we can just keep moving on to Celadon City. In Celadon City, I head over to where the PP up would normally be, and it's actually an HP up, which is good for money. And then I can head over and buy some items. So I definitely need the Super Repels for later in the game. Those are just required. I don't want to have encounters slowing me down. It takes a few seconds every time you run into a Pokemon. So when you're on a speedrun pace like this, where I could actually get a really good time with Charizard, I don't want to be running into random wild encounters. Then I pick up a couple of calcium and a couple of proteins just to continue to increase Charizard's damage. We're just going for as much damage as we can, as quickly as we can. I figure his speed is going to be pretty good. Then we can go pick up Fly. Fly is going to be actually pretty good on Charizard because it does get stabbed with Fly. It does have only 95% accuracy and only 70 base power, so it's not the greatest. But it could be useful against some of the ghost types, as well as just kind of another backup move for fighting Pokemon and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty good. We do have a couple of tough matchups, but for the most part, pretty easy on the Rivals team. He does have a Jolteon, but other than that, really not too bad at all. The Fearow still isn't that much of a problem. A random note here, even the ghost in the Pokemon Tower is randomized, so it wouldn't be a Marowak, it would be actually a Mewtwo, which could have just been fun, but I mean, I didn't want to have to stop and get it, but just a fun little note there. With the rival beat, we head over to Erica's gym. And normally this would be pretty easy as Charizard. It's still not too bad at all because I'm so overleveled. But, you know, no grass types really. And then using the Pokeflute, we clear out the Snorlax, which actually turns out to be a Weedle today. Oh, look at that little guy. And then we can speed through the bike route and go to the Safari Zone and pick up Surf, which is going to be useful, obviously, to get to Blaine. After which we dig out and we can go to Sylph and fight the rival. We are already now level 40 in 28 minutes, which is incredible pace. The rival does have a pretty decent team with Clefable and Butterfree and Tauros. Actually, really not bad at all. But I'm overleveled. Charizard is a great starter. And with the right matchups, Charizard is actually great. It has fantastic base damage. Just needs that lucky matchup. Speaking of which, when I get to Giovanni, it's a bunch of not very lucky matchups, theoretically, because he gets a Rhydon, he gets a Nidoqueen, and a Nidoking. He has an incredible team. And after Charizard deals with those, he actually has a Raichu as well, which is really funny and also pretty good against Charizard, but we make it through. And then I head over to a gym leader that's normally not a problem, Koga. Koga's Venonats can be tricky for some Pokemon. For Charizard, it should be a piece of cake. However, since he is randomized, today he has an Onix, which he misses Rock Throw on the first time, but I realized that could be a problem. Dugtrio with Slash is also pretty strong, and then he finishes with a Ditto as his ace. Ditto transforming into Charizard and stealing my stats is actually pretty strong. My next playthrough, I do get pretty lucky. I have to dodge a couple of important things like the Rock Throw, as well as Slash can do a lot of damage. I can't really dodge that one. But I make it back to the Charizard, and I realize this is going to be rough. Between Rock Throw having to miss and having to do decent enough damage against the Ditto, because he can just do the exact same amount of damage back to me, I really don't think it's going to be a great thing to just keep rolling the dice on. So I head over to Sabrina, and that actually turns out to be a pretty decent fight. There's no Snorlax on her team here for Charizard, but there's a Wigglytuff, not nearly as scary as the Snorlax could have been. She does still have an Alakazam, which isn't that hard for Charizard. I mean, it's a pretty decent matchup with Slash. Slash does tons of damage, and Alakazam is so squishy that it really isn't an issue. Just kind of cool that she still had an Alakazam. I go back to Koga, and I'm sure that this time I'll do better, but I don't. Dugtrio actually takes me down this time. But now at 6 resets, I feel like I've learned my lesson. I go back in and I'm just trying to pay attention, see if I can improve anything here. And then I get a lucky miss from Onix, so I'm still full health going into Dugtrio, which is awesome. I actually don't take too much damage from Dugtrio, and then I level up, which is awesome because then I can get Flamethrower. And this does great damage against Ditto, sets me up to be able to win that fight, as well as it's going to be super useful throughout the game for any grass types, any ice types, so definitely a good addition to the moveset. I go and pick up Strength, and then I teach Surf and Strength to Nidoking, so I have those on Nidoking, and then Cut on Sandslash, and then the others, Fly and Dig, on Charizard. This is actually the fewest Pokemon I've ever used to get through Pokemon Yellow, which is kind of fun, actually, having such a small team and having, I mean, not that it really matters that much, but it just feels so efficient. In fact, I'm getting to Blaine before 37 minutes, which is incredible, especially for Charizard, who kind of struggles in this game often because some big hitters with both rock type moves and water type moves can really throw it off normally. Blaine does have Omastar, which is a really weird matchup, and it's actually going to bode for some problems at the champion. But for him, at least for now, it works out pretty okay. Even though they really resist fire moves pretty well, Dig does decent damage against the fossil Pokemon. And that gets us to Giovanni. And Giovanni leads with an Arbok, which with Glare could be a big issue. Luckily, not today. Dig having base 100 damage in Gen 1 is just so good. It really is too strong. I'm glad that they did take that down a little bit. It feels a little bit unfair, but against some of these poison types, it's so useful. But Charizard does take some damage. I get to Clefable, almost through, but I get put to sleep, and I take a bunch of damage, and I get hit by Psychic, which drops my special. It just isn't going well, and then Executor can just finish me off. Giovanni actually has a really trolly team this time. It actually could be really problematic if you just get unlucky at any point in this. Weezing has both Smokescreen and Self-Destruct and Explosion, so it can do decent damage, lower your accuracy. Obviously Glare that I mentioned on Arbok. The Sleep from Clefable that I got hit by was really problematic. The Executor has Hypnosis. It's all just really annoying. Luckily Flamethrower and Fly are really good at this point for both Clefable and for Executor, so it works out. With that, we make it to the rival, and he actually has a really strong team against us. He leads with a couple of really strong water-type moves with Seadra, Poliwrath. So that could be a rough start. They have Water Gun, they have Agility, Hypnosis, a lot of stuff that could actually mess me up. And even once I beat them, there's a Dragonite, which obviously will be tough. And I get a couple of resets here. It definitely is a strong team. I do go and level up with my rare candies just to make this a little bit better. I get up to level 53, which puts me up a little bit higher on the rounding for some of the damage. One really annoying thing about Dragonite is he has Thunder Wave, and it's always going to try to go for that in order to get some status, and then it has a Wrap, which is just annoying. It's interesting. Dragonite in Gen 1 doesn't really have any dragon moves and is actually a problem in totally other ways than you'd expect. Once I'm past those first Pokemon though, it gets a lot easier with a Vileplume and a Fearow. Not nearly as much of a problem. I can make it through Victory Road real quick, and then I can get to Lorelei. At this point I have 9 resets, which isn't great, but I am at only 45 minutes getting into the Elite Four, which is really not bad at all. Lorelei does have not 1, but 2 Raichus, which is pretty strong against me, but also just kind of really funny to get flipped like that. She's almost an electric type Elite Four member at this point, which is kind of weird. She does still have a Starmie though. Her ace is also an Alakazam, which kind of feels funny for Lorelei. Really interesting. I do have the chance to learn Fire Spin at level 55, and in Gen 1 it could be kind of useful in some ways. I don't think on this moveset it's going to be any good, so I just don't learn it. Once again, we get to see Bruno's team, and he has an Onix actually today. Look at that. Wow. Besides that, he doesn't really have much of a theme today. He does have some decent team diversity, and still, this randomized team still does better than his normal team often does. So there's that. But Agatha is actually probably going to be not as good as she normally would be. Obviously, normally her team has a lot of trolley tactics and sleep moves and all sorts of stuff that can really make things difficult. So without that, she really isn't nearly as much of a problem. It does still get a little bit tough because, I mean, she does still do decent damage. Her ace is actually an Arcanine, which is kind of fun. But with Dig, I'm obviously the better fire type today. And then we can start preparing for Lance. Now, Lance normally in Yellow version is actually a huge problem for Charizard because he starts out with a Gyarados that has Hydro Pump. And that'll just obliterate Charizard normally because Gyarados actually has excellent special stat and can do some really good damage with water moves. So with that, it's really tough for Charizard to get through Lance at actually even a level like this. But today, without that problem, Charizard is actually looking to finish possibly under 50 minutes, which is really, really good. Lance does also have a Ditto as his ace, which is kind of fun. So that's 2, but his Ditto is not a problem. And that gets us to the champion, and I'm just racing the clock at this point. I'm really trying to get under 50 minutes. I'm just trying to do my best. But he has a tough matchup. He has Aerodactyl into a Poliwrath, which is like actually pretty good. And then after Poliwrath, he has a Chansey. Chansey isn't really that much of a problem, but I mean, it's just, you know, a lot of HP. So Kabutops is going to be a huge problem because it has Hydro Pump. Even though its special is not very good, it's still good enough that Charizard will have some problems here. I immediately get reset by it, and I get reset several times actually. Charizard's special is actually not that great. It's good, but it's not, you know, top tier good. And I don't have a ton of damage against him. I have Dig, and that's kind of my only option. Slash is not very effective, Fly is not very effective, Flamethrower will do nothing. It does still take me until 12 resets to get a good run against the champion. The first few Pokemon really are not that bad, I just don't want to take that much damage. I mean, I don't know how much I would need to survive the Hydro Pump, but I get the miss on Hydro Pump that I needed, and I'm able to hit Dig, and then Fearo's really not a problem after that. It's never actually been a problem this run. And with that, we make it to the Hall of Fame. We finished the game with a real time of 50 minutes and 6 seconds. A playtime actually of under 3 hours. This was kind of a longer video, so thank you for sticking around. And until next time, have a wonderful day.